Hi there, I'm Lord Theranis, and welcome to a somewhat different video to previous ones I've put out. In this video, I want to be a bit more candid about my personal opinions on what makes up the essence of an Elder Scrolls experience, and how that relates to the cornerstone of any modern Elder Scrolls game, modding. To begin with, this video will make a bit more sense if I give you some context on exactly why I'm making it. I recently finished the Beyond Reach mod for Skyrim. It's a New Lands mod, and it's one of the few where the moniker of DLC-sized is actually a reasonable appellation. It's a gorgeous mod with a fully realised and well-populated landscape, with a bevy of side quests and exploration options to go with its main questline. Honestly, I'd highly recommend that anyone looking for a longer, larger experience from a mod, at the very least give it a try. However, whilst I still think it's a good mod, the main thought in my mind when I finished its main questline was that didn't feel like the Elder Scrolls. Despite the various achievements of the mod, the events I'd played through hadn't quite felt like they fit in terms of the themes and stories that are part of the Elder Scrolls game series. And that got me thinking, what does make a mod feel like it's a natural part of the expansive world of Tamriel? It's not an easy question to answer. That natural in-sync feeling with the world of a game is something you only really become aware of when it's missing. If all is well, you never even put a thought towards it. It's also a very subjective feeling. No two players of course feel the same way about any game, and that's especially true with the sort of games Bethesda makes, where there's a very heavy emphasis placed on playing it your own way. Still though, I think I've managed to identify a few different elements where, at least for me, the presence or lack of these contributes heavily to whether I feel a story-driven Elder Scrolls mod fits, quote-unquote, into my playthroughs. I was originally going to call this element the world. After all, one of the biggest selling points of the Elder Scrolls is that the handcrafted, intricately detailed environments you explore are just that. The varied cities, the different types of dungeon, the little random details you find in the wilderness, they all make you appreciate the effort that the developers put into making the game. But as I thought about it a bit more, it occurred to me that in the context of modding, all of that doesn't necessarily matter. What matters to me, at least, is getting the NPCs that populate that landscape right by making them feel like, for want of a better term, people. One of the hallmarks of the modern Elder Scrolls game is the semi-unique NPCs that populate the world. The people you'll find across Morrowind, Cyrodiil and Skyrim all have their own slightly different facets to each character. They've got their own attitudes, from Oblivion onwards they have their own daily schedules, and most importantly to me, they have their own names and faces. Pretty much every NPC in Oblivion and Skyrim that isn't a guard or inherently hostile has their own name and face to them, even if nothing else about them is really different to any other NPC in the area. And whilst Morrowind doesn't have the level of facial customization, it extends its unique naming system to many of its hostile NPCs as well. You can go into caves and find individually named bandits. It's those little factors that I often see left at the wayside in mods. A mod can have lovely landscapes and a gorgeous town and city, and with it can have interesting, unique central characters for the quests within those environments. But if every other NPC in those areas is just called City Dweller or Pilgrim, then the mod starts to feel less and less like it's a living part of the world it's supposed to inhabit. Having NPCs in your world that feel like people doesn't necessarily mean handcrafting and specifically creating every single aspect of every single NPC in a mod. Ultimately, I'm really not going to care over much if Sovet Avagal the Breton has a face that's very obviously randomised, or has the exact same daily schedule as Phelan the Bosmer. But the fact that each of those NPCs has something that's unique and specific to them really helps make them feel alive, and make the mod feel like it's part of the populated world of Tamriel. An Elder Scrolls game ultimately has only one real focus: your character and what you do with them. Now that sounds a lot like I'm stating the obvious, but bear with me, because it's a concept that even Bethesda themselves sometimes don't quite get right. For example, I love Oblivion to pieces. It's my favourite game of all time by a large margin. But I'll freely admit it has its flaws, and one of the biggest of those is that for almost the entirety of the main quest, your hero feels like a side character in someone else's story. As soon as you hand the Amulet of Kings over to Joffrey after escaping the tutorial, the game becomes a story about Martin Septim. Your character just exists really to step in and do some of the legwork every now and then. I see a similar situation in a variety of mods that I don't think feel fitting, especially ones which are heavily character driven. I can see why it happens, and it's an easy trap to fall into. I know I'd likely struggle with it writing a mod for the Elder Scrolls myself. If you're writing a story around a blank slate customizable player character, it's a lot to deal with. You have to tread a very fine line between nudging the player down the correct route for the story you're trying to tell, without making assumptions about or forcing opinions upon the kind of character the player is trying to be. It's very tempting to avoid the variables in the story that you can't properly control, i.e. the player, and then just focus on the ones you can. Trouble is, when you're just watching someone else's story from the sidelines, you're barely playing a game at all really, let alone one with the rich depth and characterization of the Elder Scrolls. Now, caveat that this isn't to say that I think mod authors should be making the player the central character of every mod out there, but more that I think it should be something that we're always aware of. The fact that the player should always be a player in the world of the Elder Scrolls. This one is a bit more of a general point about tone overall. It's also probably quite subjective, I'll admit. What I feel about the overall tone of Tamriel is in no way speaking for everyone who plays the games. However, I still think it's a very important thing to get right in a mod if you can. The Elder Scrolls has a number of dark stories. It has tales of murder, theft, destitution, and far, far worse. By no means does every story in the world of Tamriel have a happy ending. But they're never bleak. At its core, Tamriel is a world of hope. The stories might be black or the events terrible, but at the end of every story we play through, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Tamriel's the kind of world where heroes can exist, where one person can make all the difference in the world, and where if you make the right choices, that person can save everyone. If you take that element of hope away, then ultimately, at least in my opinion, it's not really the Elder Scrolls. I know some people might label me as being unrealistic here, or overly optimistic, expecting every story to have its happy ending, but I don't think an ending has to be happy to be hopeful. Take the Mages Guild questline from Oblivion. By the end of that questline, almost the entire council of mages is dead, and the Archmage with them. A guild hall has been burned to the ground, its occupants slaughtered almost to a man. That's not a happy ending. But at the same time, Mannimarco, one of the greatest threats in all of Tamriel, has finally been defeated seemingly for good. A new Archmage has been appointed, and even after the dissolution into the Synod and the College of Whispers, the spirit of Cyrodiil's Mages Guild lives on. Light, even amidst a dark ending. When you compare that with the ending of Beyond Reach, which was the primary issue I had with the questline of this otherwise well-done mod, you can see what I'm talking about. At the end of Beyond Reach, I found myself running for my life as the Reach collapsed into chaos. Despite doing everything I could to help the people of the Reach, to the point of even preventing a Daedric prince's incursion into the realm, I was still forced to watch without any hope of rescuing the situation, as the depraved acts of a mad king were revealed, and invaders and rebels drenched the region in rivers of blood. My other option wasn't much better. I could have sided with that Daedra, and held off the invaders for a time by murdering an innocent man to preserve the status quo. Even then though, the mod heavily suggests that the most I've done was delay the inevitable. Even for a dark, villainous character archetype, that's a bleak, depressing ending. There's no achievement of any form, no success, villainous or heroic. Just utter failure or eventual failure to choose from. Now, I don't think this is a slight against Beyond Reach. For one, the mod is very much still in development. I wouldn't be surprised if options opened up in future iterations for endings of a different tone. And second, those endings, while dark and depressing, are still told pretty well. But for now, they both struck me as not quite right in the context of the world of the Elder Scrolls. Thank you very much for listening to all of this, whether you agree with me or not. One thing I'd like to make clear before I sign off, though, is that whilst I think these three elements all contribute heavily to the fit of a mod in the world of Tamriel, it's also nigh on impossible to get all of these elements right. Modding is not an easy task, and whilst I can sit here and criticise from my experience as a player, that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of effort gone into making these mods, and that should always be respected. In my eyes, these elements are an ideal, but by no means a requirement. Missing some of them might have an effect on my perception of the mod, but by no means outside of extreme cases does it stop a mod from being good. In the same vein, hitting these various elements doesn't guarantee a good mod. You can have a fantastic, well-made mod that still doesn't sit quite right in the game. You can also have one that's seamlessly integrated into the world and lore-friendly as anything, but still provides a bad experience for the player. There's no right answer to this, but I think it's food for thought, and something that's very important that players and mod makers alike should keep in mind when customising our gameplay experience. Once more, thank you very much for listening, and please do let me know your thoughts on this topic and whether you agree or disagree with what I'm saying. Either way though, I'll see you next time.